to it, then you can share it with them. It is a very tight agenda this afternoon. So we've got the 5 pilots, have got 20 minutes each. So the idea is 15 minutes for a bit of an overview of what they were doing, and then 5 minutes for questions. Please, can you stay mute? We'll see how it goes, but at the moment we were thinking that if everybody stays muted and then puts all your thoughts and questions in the chat, please do use the chat. Then Bella and I can pick out some key questions and put those to the pilots in that 5 minutes. But if necessary, we could open it up, but if we'll keep it like that for the moment. And also there's a massive health warning from Matt and others at Natural England that this is learning from the pilots, and they are pilots. So we obviously, Matt, add anything else if you want to, but we obviously do need to wait for the guidance and the regs in terms of what we're actually being asked to do. But it's still, nevertheless, I think useful to hear what they did and hear some top tips. Matt, is that okay? Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, that's cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Things will be slightly different when it all comes out into the light. But
yeah,
this is all very useful stuff. Yeah.
Don't know when that's going to be, do we? So
not quite. No.
No. Okay. All right. And Matt, just so people know, can you just tell everyone who you are? Because it's quite useful that you're on the call.
Yep. Matt Lowe. I'm in the LNRS central team at Natural England. So we're working on. Well, I'm working on data and evidence alongside other folk who are working on the regs and guidance and all sorts of other stuff. But
great, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And do try and answer any questions that you can, Matt, or any of your colleagues in chat as we go along. That'd be really useful. But we don't expect you to be able to answer any questions at this stage, obviously. And also, I just thought as well, the other thing we will, so we will record that we are recording this, but we will also collate all the chat and questions, and we can put all of the questions that can't be answered to the pilots. We can't possibly expect them necessarily to answer all of them, but they will answer the ones that they can in the time that they have. And Bella will compile that. And again, we'll put some question answers onto the Devon LNP website and let you know when that's up as well. And then I also wondered, so this is sort of for Matt and colleagues, and not to answer now, but PAS have just set up Base Camp for Biodiversity Net Gain, which is leading to loads of really useful questions and discussions and sharing learning. And it might just be useful to have something similar for local nature recovery strategies. So I don't know if Krista is on the call, but if PAS are thinking of doing anything similar, obviously there's a lot more than planning or Natural England or DEFRA, but it'd be worth us all thinking about that for the future. So anyway, I'll shut up and over to the pilots. So the first one off is Hannah and Rachel from Cumbria. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
I'll just let you share now. Should be.
Thanks, Bella. Sorry. So, what do I want there? If I just say screen. I'm at the wrong end. Bella, can you just let us know if you can see that?
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, Rachel Whaley, Planning Officer. I was involved leading the pilot project. Hannah Gervin is now our Environment and Sustainability Lead, and she's taking on with other team members the LNRS work going forward. So I'm just going to talk briefly to introduce the process and how we managed it during the pilot, and then Hannah will pick up more on the product and how that's being developed and ongoing work leading up to the national rollout. So just going to start with a very quick bit of context about Cumbria. So we're the 3rd largest county in England. We have a very high number of protected landscapes and habitats within our area, diverse range of habitats, very rural landscape, a lot of farmers, landowners, etc. But equally, you know, the urban areas that we do have, some of the most deprived areas. You can see the stat there that a number of our communities are actually within 10% of the most deprived of England. So, next slide, please. And this is my famous slide from the Cumbria LNRS pilot. Don't necessarily expect you to be able to read everything on it, but that's kind of the point. This is how we were trying to plot the process and work our way through it. We had a memorandum of agreement, MOA, I think, with Natural England that set a very clear process, a 5-step process that we had to follow to test this pilot out. And it also gave us some fairly clear guidance about, who you should have on your pilot area team, and who you should be engaging with. And then after that, it's kind of up to you. So to start off, that gave us one of the conundrums for Cumbria. So the pilot area team, that's the blue box at the top of the screen, if you can see that. The guidance said you should, as a minimum, have the main DEFRA bodies. So that was the EA, Natural England, Forestry Commission, and then your planning authorities. So as the only 2-tier authority in the pilot, we have 9 local planning authorities. So County Council is a planning authority, Minerals and Waste, that's my day job, 6 district councils and 2 national parks, who we invited as local planning authorities. And we also thought it'd be a very good idea, because the guidance suggested that would be, that local nature partnerships would also be good partners to involve. And we thought, perfect, because the local nature partnership represents the many individual organisations. But of course, we have 3 AONBs who we're used to working in partnership with, and they said, well, if the national parks are on the pilot area team, why aren't we? And we had to explain they were invited as planning authorities, not protected landscapes. But anyway, to manage expectations, so we then brought the 3 AONBs onto our already very big pilot area team. And then Cumbria Wildlife just wanted to know why they couldn't be on it. And it was a good job they came on it, because they were contributed a great deal to it. But the conflict we had was that we were trying to keep it light at the top. And I think the learning from this is that I think the intention really is that the pilot area team just steers things, and that the intention is that where you really have your voice as an organisation and a partner and influence is within this collaborative development group. But the perception that people had was that if they weren't on the pilot area team, they weren't going to have a voice. And so we also had queries from NFU why they couldn't be on the pilot area team, and we kind of had to draw a line under it to move on. But I think in the end, our pilot area team worked very well together, and with hindsight, looking how our pilot area team delivered the product, we absolutely would have wanted to have landowner representation on that group. And the other point I was just going to make was that because we had a lot of planning authorities on the pilot area team, that was a good thing, because it helped keep the focus on trying to remember that this document needed to be practical and usable and help inform decisions, not to get too detailed necessarily about nature recovery in its own right. And it's trying to sort of put that practical link on it. So someone asked a question, I think via email before, about would it be evidence-based for local plan? I think ultimately it would. Some local authorities in Cumbria are already referring to our pilot work in their emerging plans, but obviously it's a draft product, so it's not being formally adopted in any way, because as we've just heard, when the national rollout comes, we might have to do it a bit differently. So I'll move on from the diagram, and this just follows on really from that flow. So once we'd all settled down, our pilot area team worked very well, and in actual fact, it was tended to be the pilot area team that also produced most of the content. But I have to say, much of that was delegated to the Cumbria Local Nature Partnership, because actually the individual organisations recognised that they didn't have the time and resource to do it, so they were happy for the Local Nature Partnership to do it on their behalf, and also the Cumbria Biodiversity Data Centre for help with the mapping. And of course we had our pilot budget to pay for that. Early engagement was key for us as well. We consulted with a wide group of people, and that was particularly good that we had a facilitator to help us with that, especially given the restrictions of COVID. So it was all online. So we just grasped the nettle really, and had a lot of early sessions to just try and explain the process and get people on board. But it all felt quite rushed within a 6-month pilot timescale. In terms of engaging with farmers and landowners, I think what happened from the stakeholder sessions that we had, it became clear that there were certain subgroups that needed to sort of meet outside the big stakeholder event. And again, it all had to be online because of COVID. So I know the woodland group sort of formed quite quickly. And also we had separate engagement with the farmers and landowners. And from the pilots, that was actually supported by an elm convener that we were given, if you like, by Natural England as part of the project. So that was a really key part of the pilot. So just picking up on a few issues around conflict resolution and managing priorities. So 2 examples of conflict resolution. The first, I've given you the detail already, so I'm just putting the point up again here. It was around managing expectations. What are the roles and responsibilities of the pilot area team? Where do people need to sit in the process to have their voice heard? So that was something to resolve. In terms of a more specific example about working on the project and how to resolve a conflict, one of the measures that we had for our woodland outcomes was this one: to remove all conifers from peatland soils and wildflower grassland sites and restore these ancient habitats. What we found from feedback was that actually was not necessarily supported and does need a rethink. And you can see there the comments we were having back about why that as a measure wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. So we flagged this up as something that needs further work with our pilot, but obviously we had a 6-month timescale, so it wasn't something that got resolved within the pilot. That's just what we identified as needing to do next. In terms of agreeing with priorities, just some of the issues we encountered around part of the pilot, the LNRS process, was once you've established what nature recovery outcomes you want to see, how are you going to prioritise them? In short, it's very difficult to define clear priorities because they were all considered important and they were all well supported by stakeholders. So it's actually quite difficult to say, well, these must be the priorities. We did a survey, for example, at one of the last stages of our stakeholder engagement, and that showed that, yes, they were all well supported and no one felt anything had been missed out. So as the pilot area team, to try and deliver our product according to the spec, we tried to consider some ways to try and sift out some obvious priorities. So we thought about, well, which ones would meet the national policy objectives? Which ones can we say, well, they deliver multiple benefits? Which ones were particularly good for connectivity? Should we focus on climate change and go for those? Availability of funding, well, in reality, we felt that was most likely to be the trigger that would deliver things, but just because the funding is available doesn't mean it's the most important thing for nature. So we had a play around with the matrix and we still couldn't get any clear winners. So in the end, we came up with what we've called strategic priorities, recognising that all were important, but if we thought about our area, and here the knowledge of people on the pilot area team helped. So we came to conclusions around natural flood management. Things that delivered for that would be good for important for Cumbria because of the severity of flood events that we'd experienced. And similarly, issues around peatlands, because Cumbria holds so much of this important resource. So I'm going to hand over now to Hannah to talk about the mapping bits. Thank you.
Yeah, so Hannah Devon, yeah, I wasn't involved in the pilot, but have since picked it up and I'm leading a lot of the environmental projects that we have here in Cumbria Council. So I'm going to start by taking us through the mapping tool. So as you know, the output from the pilot comes in 2 parts: the statement of biodiversity priorities and the local habitat map. So as Rachel said, we worked really closely with Cumbria Biodiversity Data Centre to create this mapping device, which is freely available for to anyone to look at. I'll share the link after this. How they compiled the data was to use national data and then locally sourced the data that was available from partners, and they brought this all together and using the GIS specialist at CBDC, he was able to check the suitability of the data, if it fitted with the requirements. It was able to give a confidence rating of that data, because quite a lot of this data, as you'll know, is quite out of date. We're not able to keep this up to date all the time. So we've included that in our mapping device. He's ranked it so that whether local data or national data supersedes each other, and then he's added the classification as well. This has enabled us to have 2 mapping devices, and the first one here is the base map showing the habitats in and around Cumbria. So we've got 37 different layers on there. I would have liked to have done this live on the map, but I just couldn't trust that it would definitely work. So I've taken screenshots to give you an idea of this. I'll do a play around with it afterwards. So this map, yeah, as I said, it gives you the different habitats, and you can zoom in further onto that, and in each of the layers you're able to click to see what the layer is, and then we've got, as I said, we've got the date of when this layer was created, and with it the confidence of that layer. So it's identifying places where we do need to improve on our data. Then with, as I said, we've got the key of the different things, so you can zoom right in to quite specific areas using this map. The second map is the modelling networks map. So this uses the Natural England Habitat Network model to help identify where those habitats are. So the primary habitat is shown in green on this map of our blanket bog, but then also associated habitats and where it could be restored or enhanced. So for each of the 15 themes, we have these maps that we can then click to see, identify opportunities. And again, you can zoom in, but a big part of what we're looking at the moment is working with partners, and for some of our own projects is ground truthing this data, as this is national data. Quite often when it comes down to this specific, it's maybe not as accurate as we'd like it to be. So there is work there to be done on our maps still going forward. As part of the statement of biodiversity priorities, as Rachel mentioned there were, this is where our outcomes tables are. So we had 15 different themes and 76 outcomes in total. And what these tables have enabled us to do is link up with co-benefits. And so this has been really helpful when you're looking, say, to apply for funding, or looking to see where there's crossover. So like peatland habitats will also produce help bring about clean and plentiful water, can help with flood risk control, carbon sequestration, thriving plants and animals, and natural beauty and heritage. So top tips going forward, and what we're trying to do at the moment is keep the momentum going. We're very lucky to be one of the pilots, so we really want to keep the momentum up and to improve our process for when we get the green light from DEFRA for starting the full rollout. So as Rachel mentioned before, governance is really important. So it's really important that it's clear what the different groups are doing, who's a member of the different groups, and what role we're hoping for them to play in those groups. It's a big time commitment for a lot of these key partners, so it's important that they're given the chance, but not having to overly commit on this. There needs to be more emphasis on the practical side, so the usability of the LNRS, and including groups that are really on the ground and able to use this data. So potentially one area that we really need to develop is our linking up with land managers and farmers, and bringing them into the steering groups to help get land better on the ground. Really important to take time to prepare meaningful engagement. As Rachel said, it was all done online due to COVID, but we'd strongly recommend using a facilitator to do the organising of the meetings, so that takes that stress away from the responsible authority, and so it can really help bring the best out of those meetings. Communication. So I think this is really vital. Start early and do little and often updates so that people know what's happening and that there is stuff going on, and that they can be kept in the loop around. This helps head off inquiries at the beginning and helps to build up those contacts for later. One way that Rachel's pilot and the group did really well was the stakeholder engagement. We've got a really good group now of people we can draw on to help with this. And then really important is manage expectations. So be really clear on what the LNRS can and cannot do. We've used it as a guide to show options for change to land management, but it's not going to be a prescriptive plan to give the specific project. So it's really important that everybody understands that from the outset. So those top tips we've definitely built into what we're doing in this sort of interim period between the pilot and the full rollout. So we set up a smaller core group that's got Natural England and the Local Nature Partnership, the Cumbria Biodiversity Data Centre and ourselves, looking at what the data's like, what's missing, what else needs to be updated within that, and we're reaching out to the wider partners to help us in those discussions. We're looking at governance, the offset. Again, we're in a very fortunate position to have the pilot, so we can build on that and link in with our existing partnerships, and this has really helped us look at the Cumbria Local Nature Partnerships role as a whole as well, and given that a booster probably across many different partners as well. So we need to know what work is going on with nature recovery. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's very much about working with the people out there doing the work, and a big part is creating this engagement plan so that we're taking everybody along with us in the process. And final bit from me is this has very much led into many of the environment projects that we're leading on here at Cumbria County Council. So a few of them are just mentioned here that we've successfully secured funding for. So we've got Planting Pollinators scheme, which is seeing enhancement of our verges or patches of grass in our towns to help link up our biodiversity. So we've got our Cumbria bee lines that this is being based on. So this year we've got 158 hectares being planted up by a team working with Cumbria Wildlife Trust. We were successful in the Local Authority Treescapes Fund, so planted 71 trees in Barrow and Furness on highways, so into existing pits, which is not a cheap process, as you'll all be aware. And we've secured, we've joined the England Community Forest Group. So we've got 2.6 million for the next 3 years for tree planting in and around our West Coast urban areas, with a real focus of helping our communities to have green space nearby. Then internally, Cumbria County Council has committed to an environment fund the last 2 years. So we've seen each local area committee be able to run very local projects to help with the environment. So this has included tree planting, planting pollinators, improvements to footpaths and cycleways, having specialists come into schools to talk about environmental projects and things they can do. So it's a really important one for our councillors to link in with their local areas. And we're under development with funding from DEFRA for biodiversity net gain, how we can link up the pilot to the requirements there. And we're also working on the Borderlands Natural Capital Innovation Zone along with Northumberland. So that's, yeah, all of this is being based on the local nature recovery strategy in the first instance. I'll be able to share this slideshow afterwards, but it's got the links to our maps and strategy there, and contact email if you have any other questions. That's it from us.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. So we've just got a few minutes for questions. That was really useful overview. I think, Bella, we've only got a couple of questions. Oh, Liz has just come in there. So should we just get people to read them out quickly? So AJ, or Gemma, do you want to just ask your question quickly?
Yeah, hi. Very quickly, Alan Gemmett here over in Liverpool City region. It was just a very quick one in terms of resourcing and the funding you got for the pilots. Did it wash its face in terms of the cost of all the activity you undertook?
Yes, it did. I forget the precise amount. Was it about 124? Let's say 120-ish. And yeah, that did actually cover all that we felt it needed to from our point of view, including me being seconded from my job to do it. And then, yeah, we got that allowed us to pay to resource the Nature Partnership and the data centre to do the work, and paid for all the facilitating as well.
Okay, so
that's good. That's easy. Should we move on? Is that all right? David Warburton, hello. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, video doesn't seem to be
starting.
Hello.
Hello.
There we go, eventually. Hi. So just a very quick one. So how did your local nature recovery strategy pilot tie in with any existing biodiversity action plans, habitat action plans for Cumbria County Council or any of the districts? Or, I mean, so how does that all kind of tie together? I mean, so LNRS to me, it seems like a kind of mapping component of the biodiversity action plan. Is that how you've approached it, or are the two separate? Or
yeah, I think, bearing in mind I didn't, I came at it from a planner's background and not nature conservation, but what the partners on the team said to me was that what they were thrilled about was that it was the first time in 20 years that we'd come up again with a comprehensive, as up to date as it could be, habitat map for Cumbria, and people who work in that field did liken it to the likes of the biodiversity action plans, etc. So that was good. And in terms of the other plans, just very briefly, there was a lot of the dialogue throughout the pilots was how does it, because it's supposed to influence other plans and vice versa, and how do you've got AONBs who are already under different measures doing their own nature recovery network. And there was sort of an understanding really that actually ultimately all these other spatial plans would need to refer to the LNRS, when it gets to that kind of status. But
so can I just ask, building on that then, so did you update the species? You might not know, but for the biodiversity action plan, you'd have had habitats and species action plans. Were they updated, or was that information used as part of this process?
I couldn't speak as a nature conservationist because it's not work that I do. But as a planner, I know that we have the Cumbria biodiversity evidence base produced by the data centre, and that is updated and provided to us as local planning authorities for like constraints planning, etc. every year if we're partners to it.
Okay, all right, okay. Thank you. Liz, last question, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, ladies. Really interesting. I'm glad yours was the first one because we've got 14 lower tier authorities in our area and another unitary. So we've got so many planning authorities to work with. So I may well be knocking at your door for more expert opinion on how to make sure everyone's kept happy. But yeah, my question was actually sort of the chicken and egg question in this, which is what comes first? The mapping, and then you use that mapping to identify where your priorities might be and what your specific priorities might be, or do you need those priorities to define how your mapping sort of is formed? It's a question that we're debating with at the moment. We've started with the mapping, largely because in the absence of the statutory guidance from DEFRA, we're not quite sure what our priorities should be, so we thought we might as well get on with the mapping, but we just wondered if we're wasting time, so it would be really interesting to hear your thoughts.
I've got some thoughts, but do you want to pick up on your experience? Or
I would say they both need to go alongside each other. I don't know, that's not a very good answer, sorry Liz, but yeah, they're both so interlinked. And so from our review at the moment, we're looking back at how we can get the two to link back closer. But yeah, from the way
I think my recollection for the pilot, so I think you're right to start with the mapping, because in a way it's like that's, you need to know what you've got.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps the tension then comes, and that's what I observed, and you'll find this if you're going to have a lot of planners in your group. So look at it as a positive. Is that it, I say this as I said this also to the pilot, I'm not a conservationist. So the people whose job is to be immersed in nature conservation and ecology naturally think, oh great, we've got the maps, so that tells us we can do this here, there, because we understand the habitats, we understand the species. And then you'd have me as the planner trying to put the pilot kind of say, yeah, but this nature recovery strategy isn't just supposed to repeat that, it's supposed to look at how can we use that to deliver all the other things we've got to do. So I think simply do your map, and then in theory I think you should then go away, what are the priorities? Forget the map then, you've done it. What are our priorities? And then you go back to your map to see, is that going to help you fit them in the right place?
That's brilliant. Actually, I should have said that in my comment. I put that it felt like it probably is an iterative process. So Hannah, you said not very helpful. It is, because that's reaffirmed what I was feeling, that it's going to be a 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and eventually we'll get there. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you very much, Cumbria. Aware you've got to go at some point, haven't you? But thank you. That was really useful, and we will be in touch with any remaining questions just to feed in, and we'll see where Krista's going in terms of a platform as well. Next up we have Sam from Manchester. And Sam, I will come in when you have 3 minutes to go before we go on to the 5-minute questions. I'll butt in, I think, and just say 3 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, do please.
Okay.
Right, I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see that, Sarah. Okay. Is that still up on the main screen?
Yes, that's great.
Great, perfect. Afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many people here. I'm Sam Evans, Head of Natural Environment at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So moving down the country to obviously a little bit more of an urban area than we've just heard from Cumbria, which had its own brought its own considerations and other factors with it. So I'll just try to run through the key things that we learned and found during the pilot. I guess the first thing to say, as with Cumbria and relating to some of the questions, is you'll all be developing these in your own area where you've got different partnerships, you've done different sorts of work, different areas of focus. So for us, it was really important to build the pilot into everything else that was going on. And as with everyone, we've probably all been on slightly different journeys over the past, particularly over the past 5, 6, 7 years or so. We were the urban pioneer under the 25-year environment plan. We've gone through doing natural capital accounts, the election of a mayor, publishing a 5-year environment plan and a natural capital investment plan, and launching an environment fund as well, and getting up and running with that over the past year or so. So the LNRS was really trying to slot that in to what we were doing, not just testing things for DEFRA, but making this a really important part and a piece of evidence that fitted in with the other work that we've been doing. And you'll all have your own priorities, areas, projects that this LNRS will help tie together and help build the evidence base for. And as an urban area, obviously nature recovery and tackling the biodiversity emergency is really important, but also there's the other benefits that nature brings with it for us in an urban area with nearly 3 million people, particularly the recreation, the health and well-being benefits at the top row on the left-hand side there. So trying to bring in not just a focus on habitat restoration and recovery and all the Lawton principles, but how also those could deliver wider benefits was a key thing for us in progressing as a pilot, and also important in bringing that in to the work that we did.
Sorry, Sam, just to put in there, I think you need to put it into presentation mode, if that's okay.
It should be. Is it not in presentation mode? It is on my screen.
No, it's not moving, so we can see. That's it.
Right.
Changed then.
I may just have to leave it. If it's doing something funny, I may just leave it like that then, if that's all right, rather than going full screen, because I think it's doing something funny on Zoom. Is that okay? So
yeah, I think so.
Good. Okay. So again, as with all of our different areas, are facing different environmental challenges around land, water, the biodiversity, how we bring investment in, and how we engage more people in our natural environment. So again, it was important for our LNRS to bring in all of those. This is what was outlined in our 5-year environment plan. So really making sure that the local nature recovery strategy fitted within our wider city region plans and strategies was really important for us. So that's just a bit of, I guess, the context, just thinking about the context in which you'll be doing these LNRSs and trying to make it fit, make it make sense for your stakeholders and residents, really, and how this fits in with everything else that's going on the ground. So just some things that I'm going to go through on the pilot, what we did, who was involved, structure and approach, the mapping, which I think we all did slightly differently, some of the lessons, and then what we've been thinking about for what next. So if I was asked to summarize the pilot, I think really partnerships was a really important thing for us, and will be for rollout as well, particularly with Natural England, with our Greater Manchester Ecology Unit colleagues and experts who I think are on this call as well. Were absolutely integral in terms of their expertise in pulling this together, and lots of other partners and organisations. So a real team effort coalesced around the project team in the combined authority. Lots of engagement and workshops online at the time, given where we were with the public, but also really focused with our strategic partners and our local nature partnership organisations. A public consultation online, and we'll see what comes out in the regs and guidance as to what we need to do on that in the future. Lots of data analysis and mapping work, again, from our colleagues in GMEU, and an incredible amount of work went into converting outcomes and measures into maps. Trying to align the LNRS with the different plans and strategies, and really pulling together that one overarching draft plan for nature that really puts us in a good position when we come to roll this out next year. So that's the approach, obviously, that we were testing with DEFRA, that you'll be familiar with and will be confirmed in some way through the regs and guidance. That the base mapping, adding of local data, describing the area, identifying outcomes that we want to achieve, identifying measures and ways of achieving those outcomes, putting those back on a map, and bringing that together in a strategy. In terms of the structure of our team, using the resources that we had from DEFRA, we really tried to build expertise within the GMCA and partner organisations. So we had a project manager who drove the kind of day-to-day delivery of the project, a data analyst, a GIS expert and analyst, and the wider ecological expertise within the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit. So that worked really well in terms of a structure for the team with the right expertise and skills around the table. But we also needed, particularly within the time available, to bring in other expertise, particularly to help us facilitate workshops, particularly around how we engaged and communicated with people, and also how we pulled all of this together in a strategy. So yeah, somebody that can write a strategy and pull all of that information together into something that makes sense for the layperson reading it. So I think we felt that we got that, and probably we'll have something similar when we do this for real again. So that was the project team. There was also the wider organisations involved. We had a steering group that sat under our local nature partnership, with Environment Agency, Natural England, Forestry Commission, our local NGOs, some landowner representation, the water company, local authority representation, as well as we're a combined authority with 10 local authorities. So again, felt like a good representation of different sectors without overloading a steering group with too many members. So yeah, that was a subgroup that reported to our LNP. And then we also had a forum for all of our 10 local authorities, for planners and for wider environment, green space officers, those type of roles within our local authorities as well. So trying to keep all of those groups up to date and involved and engaged. And that was based on some stakeholder kind of mapping that we did at the start, those mapping of influence and interest of different groups, who we needed to keep updated, keep satisfied, who we needed to inform, and who we, particularly on the right hand side, who we needed to draw on, whose expertise we needed to draw on, and at what stage of the process as well. So that's a really important thing to think about as well, is who you need around the table at what point and for what purpose. So that's a bit about the team and engagement and those sorts of things. In terms of our resulting strategy and our approach to doing that, this was our first map, our step one map, showing our sites that are good for nature already. And I guess this was really important for us in showing that in a city region, you know, in a mostly urbanized area, there's quite a lot of white space on here. You know, you can see river corridors, you can see the fringe areas around our peatland to the east, the northeast and the north, but I think this really drove home how fragmented our network is at the moment. But you can start to see where there would be potential to join that up and where we should focus on. So yeah, that brought together the national data and local data that our ecology unit brought together to show that the current state of the network by habitat types. We then, having done that, went into looking at starting to think about the opportunities, and we used national character areas for this. So rather than going district by district, or I know some areas use catchments, which I think is also quite a good approach, we used broad national character areas, broad habitat types, to talk about the sorts of opportunities. And there's lots of good information published in these by Natural England. I think even though they are probably about a decade old now, there's lots of really useful information in there about opportunities, about habitats and species, and what the focus within those particular areas should be. And was quite a good way of talking about the habitats within Greater Manchester, how they linked up, and their main features. We then got on to really what I think is the nub, and what colleagues in Cumbria were talking about around outcomes. And we had lots of discussions about what we meant by outcomes and measures, and that probably took up quite a lot of time. But outcomes, I think we concluded, were, what does the future look like? What do we want to see in terms of nature recovery in Greater Manchester? What's the vision for what nature recovery looks like? And measures, what we need to do to achieve those outcomes. And we focused on different types of habitats to do that, some being GM wide, talked about woodlands and trees, uplands, urban green infrastructure, waterways and wetlands. So that was just the way we tried to split out how and make sense of, you know, a multitude of different types of outcomes and measures. So we had a lot of discussion about what we meant by those, and trying to bring stakeholders on board about what they were. Lots of workshops to come to outcomes like this. So this is one relating to grasslands and measures relating to that, and we went through a big exercise of prioritizing these. So we ended up with a list of about 50-60 outcomes, but a hit list really of the top outcomes that were most important, not just for nature recovery, but going back to what I talked about earlier in terms of the wider benefits that some of these outcomes can bring as well. And for each of those types of habitats where we had spatial data, we produced maps. So don't worry about the detail of this one, but there's a huge amount of work carried out by Paul Barrington in GMEU to where we could, bringing together lots of different information and spatial data from partners onto maps like this. Yeah. So yeah, other examples that we did, and lots of other different maps that culminated in a quite messy but quite important map for us, where you can zoom in on any part of the map and understand the priorities for nature recovery in those areas. All that's publicly available on our online mapping portal, and can be used in single data layers or in combinations. So that's all publicly available for download and for viewing on Mapping GM. So lessons learned, I think engagement. We did a fair amount of engagement during COVID online, but we probably didn't reach that many different people, and we probably ended up engaging a lot of the usual suspects and experts, people who wanted to engage. So we'll need to think about how we reach more broadly and further after when we come to do this in anger for real. Data, I think there's lots of other data we could have brought in if we'd had more time, particularly around the water environment from the Environment Agency, who were dealing with floods in our area at the time, so had limited capacity to engage, but we'll want to, and already talking about how we bring more of that in next year. As I said, we focused on building internal capacity rather than external commissioning, and I think we'll still want to bring together a key broad partnership of different organisations, and really building in those capabilities that I talked about as well, which are still going to be important: policy development, policy writing, project management, stakeholder engagement, comms, and really the technical skills, ecological expertise and GIS skills were really important. Things have moved on even in GM in the last year or so since we did the pilot. We're refreshing our 5-year plan. There's lots of other plans out there that I'm not sure we really tied our strategy into. So we really need to focus on where this fits with our GM plans and wider national plans, and also think about funding and delivery. So these aren't delivery plans, but we need to talk about how this is going to be implemented, how different aspects of this could be funded. And having done the pilot, I think we'll have a bit more time and space to think about how we talk about implementation in the plan. So it provides a framework for that rather than just stopping as a strategy and sitting on a shelf. So some final thoughts, other areas of focus for our refresh. I've talked about engagement and consultation, how we're linking to BNG and delivery using BNG, how we bring in more data, particularly on environmental benefits, how we link to delivery, and how we link to our local strategies and our plans. So yeah, the real key things that I think we probably didn't get time to come to in the pilot in as much detail as we wanted to, but we'll certainly be focusing on next year. Hopefully that came in those 3 minutes, Sarah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, great. This is making me starting to think about it all properly. So there are a couple of questions up. David Lowe, do you want to ask yours?
Yeah, I think it's mainly more towards the Cumbria one about local planning authorities as a part of the pilots to lead on that. I'm just wondering how local planning authorities envisage seeing it as an evidence base, if indeed it is an evidence base, to form planning policies, and see how much teeth these LNRSs actually have. Open question.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak secondhand as a combined authority publishing a sort of joint development plan across 9 of our districts. I think they're still in a bit of kind of wait and see, really, particularly at the moment. Obviously, there are hooks in the NPPF at the moment that the LNRS can add as an evidence base to, and I think certainly they're looking at how they integrate what we did even in the pilot into their local plans, depending on where they're up to. But I think generally there is obviously a desire for more detail as to how these should be taken into consideration in the development of local plans, which I'm not sure how, with the changes that have gone on even in the past few days, where that's going to end up. But others, and David's got his hand up, he may have a view, or it might be a different question.
David, is that?
Yeah, it's to answer that question. It's just for David Lowe. So there's a specific section in the Environment Act which requires the Secretary of State to provide guidance to local planning authorities in terms of how they have to have regards to local nature recovery strategies. So that was built into the Environment Act. So that is a requirement for the Secretary of State to provide specific guidance in relation to local planning authorities on local nature recovery strategies.
And presumably we will have more guidance and advice on this when the regs and guidance come out, because it's a critical bit of it, isn't it? Okay, Paul, is that on the same? We've only got a few minutes. Is it on the same subject? If not, Tim has also got a question.
Same subject, yeah. Just to say, we're doing a BNG need and supply assessment as well. And the supply sites are going to be given a better weighting if they are part of the LNRS, sort of the core infrastructure. So
yeah, there's a really close link to BNG, isn't there, in terms of the metric scores. So, okay, thank you. Tim Johns, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. It was a really good presentation. Just a very practical question about resourcing. It sounds like you went to consultants to help with some of the external facilitation, comms and engagement. Just to give a very rough idea of days, if you can, it's just useful to know.
Ooh, good question. I think on external facilitation, we were probably at about 10 or 15 days, I think, but that was prescribed by, just the amount of time we had available. And then we probably added another 5 days in terms of kind of strategy writing, but I'm not quite sure how representative that will be, because I think given a bit more time, we could have planned that resource in-house possibly. But yeah, that's an indication anyway of what it took.
And I presume those 10 to 15 days was more than one person?
No, that was just one person, because it was spread out probably across 3 months or so, and somebody that we'd worked with before, actually. So that wasn't one of the large consultancies. It was a kind of, somebody that we'd worked with before on our 5-year plan. So I think that probably helped a little bit. But it was spread over kind of three months.
Thanks.
unmute myself. I've just got one quick question. It's for you, Cumbria, and anyone else can cover this as well in terms of data. You've both said so far that you put the data in the public domain. Did you have any issues with that though, in terms of data that your local record centres hold that they didn't want to be put in the public domain?
Might ask Paul, who's from our ecology unit, to come in on that, because I know there were a couple of issues with a couple of data sets, weren't there, Paul?
Yeah, we as a local record centre, we pay for access to data from local recording schemes, so your local bat group and bird group. And because I was working as part of the LNRS group, I was able to derive data and use that data to determine flow paths without publishing the location of badger sets and barn owls and things like that. So there wasn't really an issue there, because what's been published can't be used to persecute or compete with the business model.
What about in terms of priority habitats though? Is that all in the public domain?
For Greater Manchester, our SBIs, yeah, it's public domain.
Okay, it'd be great if, as I know this is a bit of a national issue, it varies obviously from county to county, but if other pilots could mention that as well. Right, we need to move on, but brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. Nice and succinct. Great. David from Bucks, you're next. I'll give you the 3-minute warning as well. That's all right.
Thank you. I'll just start from the beginning of the slideshow. So hopefully you can see that. So yeah, David Sutherland, Buckinghamshire Council. So I'll try not to cover similar bits, so try and give different perspectives in terms of our role as a pilot. So just to give a bit of background, we were a new unitary. So we've just become we were a county in 5 districts, but obviously just become a new unitary, just to set the context. And I think focusing on the governance to start with, because it's really important that I suppose that you think about this to start with. So I'd echo previous comments about keeping I suppose the steering group nice and tight. In terms of a decision making, we had quite a smallish steering group pilot area team. It had the key members of the Deaf Area family. We had our protected landscape. We had our wildlife trust and our local nature partnership, and then we had a kind of a broader engagement group that we worked with outside that. But underneath our pilot area team, we had a number of working groups that we set up. One was mapping, one was engagement, and one was, I suppose, the writing of the final product. And we had terms of reference for each of those, because we quickly established, right, what decisions can they make? What are they doing? So that was something we worked out quite quickly. I think the other thing I would point out was, because these were pilots, none of this had any political sign-off in terms of going through an approval process beyond our cabinet members signing it off in relation to, this is what a prototype LNRS looks like. It didn't go through a, yes, we're adopting this. I think that's a really big caveat that I should just kind of point out. And yes, I think to echo that, we were given a process to follow as pilots. So Sam went through the stepped process. But I think you'll see from each of the pilots that we all did it slightly differently. We were given the process. We certainly weren't given the detailed recipe about what to do within each step, and we all did it slightly differently, which hopefully will kind of come out. So that's a bit, I suppose, the importance about the governance and the kind of the keeping the steering group as I suppose as tight as possible. And this for me kind of sums up quite nicely in terms of how it all fits together. You've got the two products in the middle, the statement of biodiversity priorities, the habitats map that kind of make it up. But feeding that, you've got a whole manner of information. So you've got your baseline data, which you're collating first. You do a kind of a pulling together of what other frameworks, plans are going to kind of, does this need to tie into, whether that be floods, GI, could be a number of. You then kind of got your stakeholder engagement work kind of on the left-hand side, whether that be, the online or the surveys. And that then, in theory, comes together as part of the local nature recovery strategy. So that's how it fits all together. In terms of the timeline, obviously the pilots were done in a pretty condensed period of time. And I think, every pilot would say that was way not enough time in terms of the 6 months. I think just in terms of whatever the guidance does say, this was a really pressured time, and we didn't have enough time to go back out and almost do that iterative process, which I think was being referred to. So I think when we come to do this again, we would do a much more iterative process throughout the stages of, as you say, as you work along the journey. But that's how we kind of set out in terms of our timeline, the pulling together of the baseline data. And I suppose picking up Liz's point, we just went to our stakeholders with the baseline data to start with. So we presented a picture of the as is without, I suppose, having also presenting, well, these are the opportunity areas, of which we had done some previously. So it was kind of difficult that in terms of how we did that, but that was our timeline. So looking at the stakeholder engagement, so again, a bit like others, we did engage a facilitator, which was really helpful to do that. So yes, we had a stakeholder working group, but we did use consultants to run our facilitation sessions. So we did our facilitation, I suppose, in one block, as it were, but kind of in a two-parter. So we did an introductory webinar to all stakeholders, which effectively kind of set out, this is the process we're going to follow, and this is what an LNRS is. So it was kind of setting out the picture for stakeholders as to what it was. We then went into a series of online workshops, online surveys, much more detailed in terms of, I suppose, the work to find out or to tease out, I suppose, the outcomes and activities that we needed from the stakeholders. We did separate surveys and workshops of farmers and land managers. As you say, we had the benefit of Natural England with a convener who helped us with that work, and they also sat on the steering group. So that connect was really helpful to get that kind of that feed in. But that's how we did it. I mean, it was one hit at the engagement. We would, I think, break that down into a series of, as you say, going back to the stakeholders once we'd done various parts of the process just to check that we'd got it right. There was a lot of people we engaged with, so a whole variety of organisations that we kind of pulled together. You know, we went through the stakeholder mapping a bit like Sam in terms of at what point we needed to engage with them and where. And there is hopefully a helpful summary report in terms of a summary of how we did the stakeholder engagement on our local nature partnership website. This was I suppose, an example of our online platform we used when we were doing the workshops. And as you can see, we also adopted, when we kind of presented the picture of the as is, we went down the national character area route as well. And just for bucks, we kind of broke it down into the 4 particular areas. And during our workshops, we kind of moved people around and we split all the stakeholders up so they kind of looked at a particular area. And then we asked them, you know, we went through, this is what the features were of that particular area, particular challenges, and then we asked them to think about their specific outcomes and actions that they wanted to see in that national character area. Again, no right or wrong way, but this is the way we went through it. What it did do, as you can see, was it did generate an awful lot of outcomes. 705 outcomes, 715 actions. How on earth are we going to then try and prioritize all of that together? So I think that was our first challenge. So having kind of got that, how on earth did we digest that? You know, again, we pulled on the combined, I suppose, skills and partnership within the partnership. So, you know, we used some of our pilot area money to bring in, buy time from our wildlife trust, to buy time from opposite time from our protected landscape. So I think we used the expertise around the partnership where we could. And it was in that respect that, you know, we had officers who were able to translate all that raw data into a spreadsheet, group it all together in terms of outcomes and actions. And then how we were going to group that into kind of themes that made sense. So we kind of whittled it down into kind of 107 outcomes and 163. And we had some themes that had started to emerge on the back of that, whether that be improved chalk streams, but how on earth are we then going to prioritize that? So, and again, there was no kind of way we were told as pilots how to do this. and again, this is whether right or wrong, this is the way I suppose we went about it. So you can see the spreadsheet we pulled together. This was a kind of popularity index on the left hand side in terms of how often an outcome was mentioned. But what we then said was, well, it can't be a popularity exercise. So we then used our I suppose expertise on the pilot area team. They then kind of, I suppose, did the moderation, the scoring to say, how does this fit together in terms, does this make technical sense from our point of view? And I think it was a collation of those two that we were then able to kind of, and it did actually kind of tally up reasonably well. I think we were then able to moderate and work down ourselves to a list of 54 priority outcomes. And again, no right or wrong way. I think Sam talked about how they then grouped theirs under habitat. We grouped our outcomes under the National Nature Recovery Network objectives. So we kind of grouped them in our Statement of Biodiversities under the National Nature Recovery objectives. Again, different. We might not do this in the when we come to the real thing, but that's how we did it and how we kind of agreed as a pilot area team that we would do it. So having done that, it was a case of okay, looking at the mapping, which is, I suppose, the other key product. I suppose a bit like the other pilots, our local record centre was absolutely invaluable. We commissioned them. Again, we used some of our money to pay for their time, their mapping expertise. We also pulled on work that we'd done in respect of natural capital mapping. So we incorporated natural capital mapping that we'd done into our kind of baseline maps, our as-is maps. So this is just a map we put together for our high quality habitats. And again, this was our map showing our national and local conservation sites. So we had these kind of ready when we went out to our stakeholders. They were the kind of as-is picture, and we weren't giving any hint as to where we kind of thought the I suppose the restoration or the opportunities were. It was literally presenting a picture of this is the as-is. And this is I suppose, one of our maps from our natural capital mapping, mapping. And this effectively highlights, I think this one is our carbon storage capacity in terms of nature. So we brought those in as our baseline just to try and reflect that wider environmental benefits that we were trying to bring on board here, that yes, nature recovery was at the heart of this, but that how we incorporating, I suppose, those other benefits in terms of decision making, and we also kind of brought in flood maps as well. So I think that's just the importance of how does this all tie together in terms of those wider environment benefits. And then just in terms of, again, demonstrating how pilots did this differently, we trialed a use of systematic conservation planning, which some may or may not have heard of. But obviously it's a process that's kind of followed with software that you kind of use, that you feed in your baseline mapping data, but you also feed in the prioritization from stakeholders, and in theory it then spits out a network based on that, without, I suppose, the influence that you might bring, or that I suppose unconscious bias that you might bring if you were just doing it. So we trialed that. We had consultants Biodiversify to help us with that. So the maps I'm just going to highlight are kind of illustrative purposes.
David, 3 minutes.
Okay, we went down a zoning approach. So just in terms of zones, so 4 zones, protected sites, effectively our core. Our zone 3 was kind of, I suppose, the interesting bit where we'd restore and recover, for instance, where biodiversity net gain would go, but we didn't want kind of an empty zone. So this was a wider zone where, other things could still happen. And this was our network. So we wanted to show a network in terms of what a joined up network might look like. On the left, I suppose, is our previous biodiversity opportunity areas. So this is how we presented it as a zoned approach, and this one represented a doubling of nature. This one you could scale it up further if you wanted to kind of a bigger network. Just quickly in terms of lessons learned then, I suppose picking out one or two. So yeah, so resources and capacity, definitely project manager, thinking about that right at the start. We kind of perhaps took too long to bring a project manager. So yes, we're recruiting for one at the moment. And that kind of sifting of which data sets you're going to use at the start, we spent far too long on that, and we got kind of bogged down with it. And that understanding of how is that end product going to be used by the various end users, whether that's a planner or whether that's a kind of a land manager or farmer. And then finally, just in terms of our next steps, so we're commissioning our local nature partnership to kind of lead the preparation of our local nature recovery strategy for real. So that's kind of a slight difference in terms of how we're doing it, but we're building in kind of gateways of when they need to come back to us as responsible authority for approval. We have just recently approved a biodiversity net gain SPD, and obviously the importance being in terms of that, you know, building in a definition of strategic significance in terms of how that then links through to the local nature recovery strategy. We're also, I suppose, kind of belatedly doing a needs assessment for biodiversity net gain as well. We're also setting up meetings with our adjoining responsible authorities to ensure how are these, I suppose, maps and plans going to join together. And we have, I suppose, in the process of recruiting for a project manager. So we're taking a little bit of a flyer before the, I suppose, new burdens funding has been recruited, but we felt that we needed to kind of to do that. So I should finish there, Sarah, so hopefully I've kept within time.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you. We've got 3 questions on the chat, all relating to data, but they might relate to previous ones as well. Is anyone, just open it up. We've got 5 minutes. Does anyone want to stick their hand out, including the 3 people with stuff on the chat for specific questions to David? Bella, shout if you can see anything that I can't. Any specific questions? Anyone? Can I ask then, David, and then we'll come on to Suzanne and Lucy, are the users that you intended to use the pilot LNRS using it as you hoped, or is it too early days?
So I think for us, it's too early days. So because we went down a zoning approach, there was definitely a lot more thought in terms of what the zones mean for the particular end users, i.e. what would that mean from a planning policy perspective? What would that mean for a farmer who was looking to kind of use that in respect of environment land management? So I suppose no is the answer to that. Has it served in terms of helping with our biodiversity net gain where that would be located? Yes, because we've been in discussions with habitat bank providers in terms of where they're thinking about locating their habitat banks. So we've kind of said, okay, well, you've got the work that we've done in terms of this is what our network might look like, but clearly we always said, look, this is purely a prototype. We need to kind of wait until we've got the final guidance because we're going to probably rework a lot of this. So I think that's kind of where we've got to. We've always indicated it's, you know, it's a prototype product.
Yeah.
We were testing a process.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Tim.
Yes, David, thanks very much for the presentation, really good. I'm just going to refer to one of your slides, map 1. So that's the slide with the protect, maintain, restore wider landscape zones. Obviously, that's quite strategic. Presumably, in the next stages, we'll start to see, or you'll start to see map bases underneath those colours, field boundaries, and
so if you'd have zoomed in on that, so we kind of ran out of time, I suppose, was the simplest answer to that. So the work that Biodiversify did, yes, you would be able to go down to field level boundary. So our natural capital mapping work and the opportunity maps does go down to field level boundary, and it's able to demonstrate, I suppose, fields which have multiple opportunities on them. So yes, ultimately it would, but we didn't quite get that far, I suppose, is the answer to that.
Oh, granted, totally. I appreciate it. I suppose the point I was making, next time you did go around,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Liz.
Thanks, Sarah. It's a question for David and the others that have already presented and others to come. It was just going back to a question I'd asked in the comments about capacity of the unusual suspects to engage, and I just wondered, not just the unusual suspects, but also the usual suspects where we're asking a lot of our stakeholders to input to this who may not have capacities, and particularly thinking for water companies who might cover more than one LNRS as well. And we've been told that the burdens funding we're given is to ensure really good engagement. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts, David, on how some of that burdens funding could be used to enable the unusual suspects and even the usual suspects to engage on a meaningful level to ensure that, you know, we get good outcomes?
So it's a really good point, Liz, because I think, you know, our learning was, you know, for instance, we pulled on our wildlife trust to do a lot of the technical work because we didn't necessarily have the capacity in-house. But, you know, our local wildlife trust supports 3 counties. They're going to have to support 3 local nature recovery strategies, and they've already said to us, you know, we can't devote the same amount of time that we devoted to the pilot. So I think it's a really good point, and I don't think we've quite worked that through yet, but, you know, that's going to apply to a number of bodies as they kind of work with a number of responsible bodies. So it's definitely something that needs to be thought about.
Thank you.
Cumbria.
Just following on from that, yeah, coming from David, we felt, certainly a lot of our partners said, you know, they wouldn't normally have, you know, if it wasn't, I think if it wasn't for the fact we were forced to do everything online because of COVID, you know, our pilot area team met every fortnight to keep on track, and we'd have never travelled across Cumbria to do it. And I think national rollout will have an issue. For example, we shared the North Pennines, so Andy from the North Pennines was on our pilot team, he was on the Northumberland pilot team. Once it becomes national rollout, they'll also have to work with Durham, you know. So I think it's some of those partners who sit in lots of responsible authority areas that will be an issue. And I think for us, that's where the Nature Partnership came in, which was part of a conundrum, which is why we said, well, we'll have the Nature Partnership in our steering group. And, oh no, they can't speak for us. And then when we asked stakeholders to do things, they said, well, can't you get the Nature Partnership to do that? And it's like, well, yes, exactly, because they can do it, you know, speaking for the group, but and be resourced. So finding the partner who could be most effective and efficient, I suppose, isn't it, to receive the resource and do the work.
It is. It's very tricky, and we've got a lot of partners to engage in this, haven't we? So and they are all, especially local authorities, very, very busy and understaffed at the moment. So, and they don't always know what they want, so can't feed in very easily from a recent discussion with planners. Right. Thank you, David. That was brilliant. This is all very quick, isn't it? It's just little snippets, really, that we're getting from everyone just to get a feel for it. But we'll move on to Northumberland now, and David.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. So hopefully you're seeing Northumberland Pilot Local Nature Recovery Strategy on screen now. So I'm David Feiger, I'm County Geologist for Northumberland. I'll whiz through the first few slides because it's stuff the other pilots have covered really. But like everyone else, we had the steering group, probably all the usual suspects. And we did a lot of the work using task and finish groups. In terms of the products, we had a story map which kind of introduced the important areas in the county. We had a statement of biodiversity priorities, and then we had a series of maps. We thought we were going to have one map, but we had a series, but I'll come on to that. So the statement of biodiversity priorities was structured around these broad habitat groupings, and for each of those, probably no surprises at all. We covered the ground set out in this slide. So I think, yeah, that'll be pretty familiar from biodiversity action plan and similar processes. So in terms of the priorities map, this is it with all the layers turned on. It's obviously very congested, but I'll just focus in on a few aspects of it. So this map shows in the khaki colour, the smaller areas, that's blanket bog, and the sort of sandy brown colours is peatland, which doesn't have priority habitat on it. So primarily that's going to be coniferous plantation and then some open areas of peat in Porkington. The fact it's mostly coniferous plantation obviously raises an interesting question that's been touched on already in terms of what should remain with a conifer crop on it, and what should be restored to peatland habitats. It's an ongoing discussion. Forestry Commission's data work looking at whether standing crops that are below a certain yield class should be restored to peatland habitats on felling. But yeah, there's potential for some quite lively conversation around that. This shows in the pinky colour areas of functional floodplain with potential for restoration to wetland habitat. And then another example from woodlands. So the brighter darker green is ancient semi-natural woodland. The palest green is ancient replanted, which we've identified as a priority for restoration to native woodland cover. And then around the mid-green, there's buffer zones around the ancient semi-natural woodland where we're saying that's a priority for increasing native woodland cover. But you'll see there's various bits cut out of those buffer zones where there's other priority habitat, or the settlement, or there's other things where it's clearly not suitable for woodland planting. We weren't planning to, but we also did an opportunities map. The reason we did this, in one of our meetings with DEFRA, within the same meeting, one official said, your LNRS map should have a lot of white space in it because it's about priorities. And if you prioritise everything, you're prioritising nothing. So we expect your maps to have a lot of white space on. And then later in the same meeting, a different official said, well, your map didn't have any white space on because you can do nature recovery anywhere. So part of the feedback to DEFRA, we were suggesting it would be better to map. So we had the priorities you saw, which did have a lot of white space because it was genuinely our priorities. And then we started work on an opportunities map, although we ran out of time, where we were looking at each natural character area and developing a sort of menu of nature recovery opportunities that would be appropriate for that NCA. And then you could just click on a parcel of land anywhere in the county and the sort of generic opportunities for that NCA would pop up. So that was the way of trying to resolve that dilemma. We also started work on a marine map. So officially, LNRS runs to mean low water. So potentially this is out of scope, but yeah, having spent the past couple of decades working on how we integrate terrestrial and marine work, we were reluctant to stop at mean low water. So again, that's something we put to DEFRA to think about. So stakeholder engagement, particularly with landowners, led by our Elm local convener, who was an absolutely crucial part of the team. So we got into an interesting chicken and egg situation with farmers. So a lot of them were saying, yeah, potentially they're interested in the sort of things we're talking about, but without understanding the grant regime that would support that work, then it's very difficult for them to comment any further, which I think is entirely understandable. But if part of the purpose of LNRS, as DEFRA was saying, is to help sort of design the detail of the schemes, then necessarily the LNRS is going to come before the scheme. So farmers are saying, well, that's going to limit the extent of their engagement, because until they understand the financial support that would be available, they can't provide very detailed comments on what they think of any particular things we were coming up with. So again, that's gone back to the feedback. We've been talking recently about best and most versatile land, especially in light of all the issues that have shot up the agenda with the war in Ukraine. I suspect BMVs will have a specific approach for us where we'll maybe have a menu of nature recovery opportunities suitable for that sort of more intensive agricultural environment. But BMV would be out of scope for large-scale land use change away from the productive agriculture. So areas of conflict of concern. We certainly had some land use interests who use the consultation to further their own agendas rather than actually engaging with the substance of the consultation. And forestry and grouse moor management were particularly notable for that, including one or two responses that suggested to us in no uncertain terms that we didn't know what we were talking about and we should really leave it to them. Public consultation, we got what I call the red squirrel and dog poo phenomenon. So whenever you consult the public in Northumberland about anything vaguely environmental, you can guarantee that some of the responses coming back will be to say that the most important thing in the world is red squirrels. And some of the responses will be, why don't you do more about dog poo, no matter what the actual subject of the consultation is. And then just the sort of general randos and hobby horses. So, yeah, there's too many sparrowhawks eating all my garden birds or whatever people's particular hobby horses are. But obviously, if you're doing consultation, you're raising expectations. So it's worth thinking about quite how you're going to handle that. And then we had some interesting feedback from landowners about, if we're producing all those maps, we're potentially showing land use change on land that all belongs to somebody. So some landowners were saying that if our maps are sufficiently fine-grained that you can identify individual field parcels, then you really shouldn't be doing that unless you've engaged with that farmer or landowner. And we had quite the opposite reaction from other landowners saying it's possible to show maps showing broad swathes of the county proposed land use change on. That's really frightening the horses. So try and be more specific. So yeah, definitely concern from farmers and landowners about showing things on maps, but their concerns can vary quite markedly. There wasn't just one concern. So mapping and the national products. Northumberland, we are quite data poor, so we are dependent on some of the national products, but some of those can be quite weak in terms of missing and inaccurate data. But one thing we discovered in the process is that some of our local Natural England staff have got edit access to the priority habitats data set that appears on Magic, and they can download from the Natural England website. So we discovered that we can actually feed data into them, and that data layer can be improved, which is great. Don't let data trump common sense. I'll just come on to what I mean by that in a minute. And we did have some issues with data licensing. We had a particular issue around peatland data produced by Cranfield University. And until towards the end of the process, it looked like we weren't going to be able to use it, which for Northumberland was a massive issue given the importance of peatlands. But Matt Lowe performed some sort of miracle towards the end of the product and towards the end of the process, and suddenly we were able to use it. So thanks to Matt for whatever you did.
3 minutes.
So, oh, thank you.
Sorry, 3 minutes.
So just an example. Okay. So this is the National Habitat Network. On the left there's various types of woodland showing restoration and expansion zones. On the right, these pale green areas are limestone grassland. So in other words, they are outcrops of limestone sticking up above a deep layer of glacial till. So what works for woodland in terms of restoration, expansion and so on doesn't work for limestone grassland because it naturally occurs as a small fragment surrounded by a deep layer of glacial till. So applying the same rules to each habitat doesn't necessarily work. So it's important to bear that in mind. Some habitats are very amenable to the process of increasing patch size and increasing connectivity. Some just naturally occur as small fragments and you can't really do anything about that. Do you need to think about that? Finally, some top tips. I would say wait for the regulations, guidance and national data and don't get too invested in doing anything now, because just because we did it in the pilot doesn't mean it's going to be part of the actual LNRS for real. Be realistic about data limitations. I am concerned that we're all going to produce lots of really splendid looking maps, which are based on data which does actually have some errors in this, and the maps just embody and amplify those. And that's particularly problematic for some of the network mapping tools where you either import a whole data set or you don't. It's very hard to tweak it and knock out some of the obvious errors in it. As responsible authorities, you are responsible for ensuring that the LNRS meets the requirements of the Act. So if your steering group has started to pull it in different directions, do keep looking at the Act and what it says the LNRS needs to have in it. Consultation raises expectations. I've talked about that a bit. Skills required, yeah, so ecology, GIS, engagement, writing, admin, management support. And then what about condition? Because probably condition of priority habitat is one of the most important things if we want to improve it. But it's not something that's very easy to represent spatially, and it's not something we have very good data about. So I think that's a very important issue that could easily be overlooked through this process. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. Good top tips. Particularly agree with the mapping one. People love shiny maps, even if they're based on rubbish data. Should we just go for questions? So 5 minutes on questions again. Tim, you are first with your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, David, for raising all those issues. Really helpful. I'm interested. I'm based down in North Yorkshire, down the coast from you. Interested to hear a bit more about the marine stuff. You know, as you say, the LNRS runs to the mean low water. Did you get much feedback from DEFRA on that sort of work that you did there?
No, we didn't, except it's not going to change. It does run to mean low water. So I think ultimately it may be we produce an LNRS and part of it is the sort of statutory document that meets the requirements of the Act, and part of it's a bit of an add-on that doesn't carry that weight. But I think we do feel very reluctant to let go of the marine side of it, even if it doesn't have this, the sort of statutory basis that the rest of the plan has.
Anyone else? So on that, I take it that you don't think that DEFRA will include marine in the LNRSs. If it's in Devon, that's obviously a big issue for us as well.
Yeah, that's the feedback we've had.
Yeah. So I think we'll do what you're doing, include it anyway, and it just wouldn't be part of the statutory document. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Bella, is there anything else in the chat? Or Liz, you had a question, thank you. And then Mark.
Thanks. It's on the marine, because obviously as coastal authorities as well, likewise, sort of considering how we include marine. And I just wondered, David, how you got round, so, because obviously you said you were quite data poor and you relied on the national data set. So I assumed that your work on the marine wasn't provided for in terms of national data set. So I just wondered how you met that side of things?
Yeah, ironically, we're fairly well off on marine data. So between, we've got something called the Berwickshire and Northumberland Marine Nature Partnership that's been operating for about 20 years. And throughout that time has had quite a focus on data. So we do have access to a certain amount of marine data.
Excellent for you. That doesn't answer my question. Not as a criticism to you, but I was hoping you'd have a magic answer, but your answer is you've got some good people.
Yeah, that's just our good fortune, really. And
yeah,
I guess the fact we have that marine partnership is part of the reason why we're so keen to include marine.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Well, perhaps we could pick Philippa's brain afterwards as well when Philippa's done the presentation, because I think they included marine as well, didn't they?
Yeah, Pip's next. So Philippa, if you can pick that up, that'd be great. Mark.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I was really interested in the engagement side. So everybody else said they used an external consultant, and unless I missed it, and I might have because I was writing down notes, I don't think you mentioned that, David. So if not, how did you carry out your facilitation engagement?
Right, so with landowners, it was through the Natural England Elms convener. Our engagement otherwise was through online surveys promoted through the communications channels of the partnerships and in the press. So it was fairly restricted. I think probably when we do it for real, we may well be looking at using a professional facilitator for that. I mean, I must say, overall, the 6 months, which was extended to 8 months, wasn't nearly enough. I mean, we were nowhere near having sort of finished products.
Okay.
So
sorry to interrupt.
Short. Yeah.
I think it could be useful if everyone can share their questionnaires that they've used for anything like that as well, actually. I mean, I know that we don't quite know what we're doing yet, but it'd be quite nice to see what you've asked people. So we might come back to you on that. Anyway, thank you, David. Sorry, this is really quick. I said it would be tight at the beginning. It's just a quick overview of everything, which is really useful. So we now have Philippa from Cornwall, our last presentation.
Right. Thanks, Philippa. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Sarah. Yes, I'm Philippa Hoskin, Nature Recovery Manager in Cornwall Council. I led on our nature recovery pilot, but with fantastic input from my team as well as from partners. So just to run you through a few things, I'm sure a lot of this has been sort of covered through others, but we've all took slightly different approaches. And just in terms of Cornwall, I should clarify it was for Cornwall only, but we are provisionally responsible authority for Cornwall and Isles of Scilly local nature recovery strategy. So that'll obviously a different element as we move forward. We're working really closely with the Isles of Scilly. But it was agreed very early doors when we were asked to be a pilot that whilst it would be led by Cornwall Council for the Cornwall LNRS, it was agreed that it would be co-created and the draft would be sort of co-adopted, if you like, with our local nature partnership and would be very heavily shaped by stakeholders. I think, unless I'm mistaken, certainly feedback from DEFRA was that in Cornwall, we went in the most sort of heavy on in terms of stakeholder engagement. I think that was partly a reflection of the fact that we were lucky in that we already had a prototype map in development with the University of Exeter. So we were able to put less emphasis on the mapping and really sort of able to do as much stakeholder engagement as we possibly could to shape the LNRS. And that was something I felt was very important. And just to be clear that whilst the pilot covered the whole of Cornwall, we do have two AONBs within Cornwall, the Tamar Valley and the Cornwall AONB. And we reached out to them right at the early stage of the pilot and clarified that we would have a single LNRS for the whole of Cornwall. Our Cornwall AONB in particular is cut across 13 locations in Cornwall. So it's really important to establish those relationships early and clarity of how it's sort of sat together. And I think it was a real strength because we were then able to work really closely with our AONBs, obviously on the back of their Colchester agreement. I think in some areas that's caused some difficulties. And as with Northumberland as well, I mean, I have a marine background, but I felt it was absolutely, it would be just so wrong in Cornwall if we weren't to talk about nature recovery without considering our coastal and marine habitats. And basically everything we did, all bar the mapping, which I can talk about in a bit more, but all of our questionnaires, we made no distinction whatsoever between terrestrial and marine, and that didn't cause any issues whatsoever with our stakeholders. And not surprisingly, a huge amount of the results people talked about coastal and marine nature recovery opportunities. But what I'll talk to you, what we did do though within the draft LNRS that came from the pilot was we just made it very clear where it was beyond the statutory scope of the LNRS. So it was just, you know, like an asterisk, basically saying this element is beyond statutory scope. So it was really quite, we just took quite a straightforward approach to considering marine. So I'll just run through what we did in terms of the statement of priorities and a few other aspects. So one of the first things I did when we were asked to be a pilot was to use some of the funding to commission the first ever Cornwall State of Nature through our Environmental Record Centre and the Wildlife Trust. And this was completed during the lifetime of the pilot, and it created a really sort of sound evidence base, because, you know, I'm a great believer in anything like LNRS as being based on sound evidence. And it really strengthened the argument and demonstrated the need for local nature recovery. And it was sort of very unequivocal, you know, data demonstrating that Cornwall was mirroring national and international trends, sadly. So despite it being, you know, a really sort of beautiful place and such like, it was very clear that the data required nature recovery and action by all. So that was something we did right at the early stage, which wasn't a requirement of the DEFRA guidance. This was something we did that we just felt was important. So that sound evidence base, if you don't have it, I would recommend something of that nature. And this came on the back of existing environmental growth key performance indicators that we have monitoring. This is just a snapshot of a few of them. So again, it just sort of helps in that demonstration of need for nature recovery to have some of these sort of key performance indicators and or data. I think that's a really important thing that you need from the outset. But we did that all at a county-wide level. I know some areas had data and maps and such like in national character areas. They don't work for Cornwall at all, and they don't really mean a lot to people in Cornwall. So all of our questionnaires and our mapping is all at the county-wide scale. We didn't at any stage have any sort of pushback from stakeholders saying, I can't understand this information at the county scale, I can't participate. You know, everyone was quite happy participating at the county scale and didn't need it broken down into local areas. So that was one area where we sort of deviated slightly from the DEFRA kind of guidance, but we justified why that was the case. The other thing I'd say that we did very early was establishing our governance frameworks, really important stage, and don't underestimate, you know, it's a very key requirement. Don't get too distracted by things like mapping and technical things like the governance. I know it's like sad but necessary. And we, as I know with other areas, felt it was really important to make the best use of existing strong partnerships. So like the AONBs, we've got Catchment Partnership and Marine Liaison Group, Biodiversity Initiative, etc., as well as an evidence group as well. We used all of those existing partnerships, and the only one that was new was we created a small LNRS steering group, which was heavily focused heavily made up of LNP board members, but also with other key representatives. And they really helped kind of validate and steer every step of our process, really. So at key milestones through the pilot, we would take information to them to either validate what our our approach, or help sort of tweak it and refine it. So that was really important. But we also tried to start understanding how this would fit with other strategies and frameworks, particularly within planning, which is obviously difficult without the statutory guidance. The next thing we did was to write a stakeholder engagement plan, which again, it's time well spent. And so we basically sort of designed our approach to creating the statement of priorities, which is the narrative element of an LNRS, and worked out who needed to be involved at each of those stages. And the other thing within our engagement plan is we try to determine which of our key stakeholder groups or partnerships was best placed to engage with that sector. So for example, Cornwall Council was quite well placed to engage with the general public, but our AONBs, we very much gave them a role within the LNRS pilot because they had far better relations with farmers and landowners. So they led they fronted, if you like, our engagement with farmers and landowners, and Cornwall Council were quite hidden in that. So, and I think that's another key thing which we found was really effective. The LNP also fronted a lot of our workshops with us acting as the facilitators and providing the questionnaires, and we did all of the organisation and such like. But it's really making the most of different partners to front things, and the Wildlife Trust fronted a lot of the ones that were involved with our more sort of expert groups. So yeah, take the time to produce a stakeholder engagement plan would be one of my top tips, because it's time well spent. And yeah, I should also say we did also engage through a number of mechanisms. We set up early stages, we set up a online engagement tool, obviously as this was through COVID, everything was done online, and that was actually an advantage. It was far more democratic. We had fantastic participation, you know, both through an online survey and through our range of workshops. We did lots of different workshops, some with experts, some with experts, some with general public, some with farmers and landowners. We had workshops with communities, groups and parish and town councils. We had workshops with businesses as well. But the thing was, we asked the same questions of everyone, and they were completely non-technical questions, very open questions. We didn't employ any facilitators. We did this all, designed all of this ourselves. And yeah, and just asked the same questions of everyone that were very open about sort of what were they concerned about and what did they think most needed to improve to essentially deliver nature recovery, and what wildlife we felt we should prioritize. We also had a where thing. We did have a little mapping sort of pin dropping mechanism as well, but that that's something we'll want to do more of as we move through to the next iteration of our nature recovery network map, make better use of the wheres, if you like. But this is the sort of what and how people wanted to see. And as I said, yeah, we ran many different workshops as well, which were really well attended, and we gave jobs to and gave voice to a really wide range of stakeholders. One of the things that worked really nicely, well, we did sort of Mentimeter questions, which is very straightforward, and it meant people could sort of see the answers appearing as we were talking. But we would, through each of those workshops, we would invite, you know, someone from a town council or a farmer or just a resident or a business to say what they wanted to see in terms of nature recovery in Cornwall. So they would just be saying whatever they wanted to say within a very short space of time, just a couple of minutes each, on what they want to see for nature recovery. And I think that we had a lot of positive feedback anyway in terms of that approach, with a real wide range of views. We had like over 700 responses across surveys and workshops, which totaled thousands, literally thousands of pages of suggestions, which I think that then did take a lot of analysis. We really took that seriously and wanted every word to matter, if you like. So it was analysed both in terms of pulling out species that were mentioned, habitats that were mentioned, grouping things up where maybe they would be better placed into a sort of more generic habitat group, but also teasing out where people were talking more about kind of potential enablers as well, nature recovery enablers. All of that analysis happened of essentially what we, through the through this sort of long listing approach. And I think
two minutes.
Oh, crikey. Okay. And we used both, in order to prioritize, we used both an evidence-based score, so some including things, evidence-based, and tally of mentions, popularity context, in order to come up with take it from a long list to a short list. Okay, so we've got 10 priorities. In terms of the mapping, as I said, this was already happening through University of Exeter. All of the methodology is online, but it was essentially taking completely open source, publicly available data, so there were no data licensing issues, and it was both biodiversity and ecosystem service data, and used a zonation approach, but excluding areas that were either the most productive farmland or built up areas were excluded. And we have different zones and suitability maps across different habitats that are county-wide, and everything's online now in terms of the results, and including our methodology. That's all available online. I won't go into some of the things we did that weren't required of DEFRA. We created a vision for nature, or a target, which is the 30% land, rivers and seas well managed for nature, and we know that equates to, from land, about 36,000 hectares, and we're now able to literally work out, right, how do we deliver that 36,000 hectares. We also, based on the stakeholder views, created nature recovery principles that would cut across all projects. And this was, so those, and enablers as well. So it's not just about the priorities. We also, from our inputs from stakeholders, were able to pull out these enablers. And in terms of our zones, we've got an existing nature network, which is about 25% of Cornwall. That's all of the favouring or recovering nature designations, plus the best of the rest, those already delivering the most ecosystem services. That was zone 1. Zone 2 is the opportunity areas, which is a further 15%, which includes wildlife corridors as well. And we had no white spaces, which was a key thing that stakeholders did not want to see any white, because there's potential for uplift anywhere, whether it's an urban garden or within any of our farmland, there can be some uplift. We also included some how-to guides within our draft LNRS, really stressing the fact that the maps are a guide, not a prescription, and that they do not replace site assessments at all. It's a strategic decision support tool. We're already using our draft LNRS in our net gain metric, because Cornwall is an early adopter. We've got a draft climate change DPD planning document, which went to the inspector, and we've got nature recovery priorities and essentially enabling spatial allocations for nature based on our draft LNRS. And the inspector hasn't kicked it out yet or anything like that. So that's positive. We're using it to guide investment in terms of our nature recovery investment programme, which we developed with the LNP to try and make the most of all strategic funding opportunities. And it's also being used as part of scoring for things like in the Cornwall AONB's farming and protected landscape funding, and that's proving successful as well. So it's already being used in a number of mechanisms, so we must have been doing something right. And we've created nature recovery toolkits for communities. We're kind of really trying to make it we've tried to make it as accessible as possible, so it's a real call to action, and have had a Pledge for Nature campaign running with the Local Nature Partnership, which is proving successful. And in terms of top tips, I think really I've said some of these, but really sort of is sorting out your governance and building in that sort of political buy-in, and give a voice to a wide range of key leaders, I would say, within your area, and don't just sort of keep it all to the usual suspects at all. You've got, the only way nature recovery is going to be delivered is if it's something that everyone feels it's a collective target and a collective ambition. So you've got to kind of give roles to lots of different people within the process. And the digital engagement tools is absolutely brilliant. I think it's actually, it wasn't a barrier to us at all. It was actually an enabler for better engagement, but really make the most of other people's meetings and other projects. We got a lot of our partners who were already running workshops to add 5 minutes on at the end. Yeah. You know, to ask the questions, make sure we get out. I think one of the key things is make it really visual, not too technical. And also I would say, don't wait for the statutory guidance. There's absolutely nothing stopping you starting your online surveys now with very non-technical questions and just starting to build that rich source of stakeholder inputs now. You know, if it's just about the generic questions about what do you want to see for nature recovery within your area. That's it.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Philippa. Sorry, this has been ridiculously tight. But you managed to get in loads of top tips there. That's brilliant. Have people got any questions? I know Liz has put something on the chat, particularly about stakeholder engagement. There's loads of stuff that you've done there. Tim.
Predictably me again. Thank you, Philippa. That was fabulous, really, really inspirational. A couple of pretty dull questions actually for you. The first one is the AONB. You mentioned that they did quite a lot of engagement with landowners. Did that go beyond the AONB boundary?
Yeah. Basically, they organised our farmer landowner events, and they were open to anybody. Yeah,
because I'm quite familiar with the OMB in Cornwall. Obviously, you've got the coastal, but they don't go that far back, really, do they? They're, you know.
No, there are. I mean, Bodmin Moor is inland, so there's patches all over the place. But basically, the events were open to anybody. It's just that the AONB organised them for us, and they, you know, their badge was all over it, so they were able to get some kudos, if you like. But also, they already had a lot of really good contacts. But it was open to anybody.
Yeah, brilliant. And then a really boring question, given all the kind of consultation and all those tasks and liaison and coordination, did you use a kind of project management software package to help with that?
Nope.
Okay.
Just good old Gantt chart, you know. I mean, I do think, you know, yeah, Gantt chart, weekly meetings of the team, you know, with clear tasks and milestones. We had it all sort of sketched out as to when key events needed to happen and such like, and worked backwards from that. But no, it was no particular agile management, I would say. And a lot of talking.
That's great. Any other questions? We have 5 minutes left. Liz, did you want to add anything about stakeholder engagement?
Sorry, I was just looking at David's report and lost the mute button. No, it was just really in terms of the stakeholder engagement, whether Philippa, you and the other pilots use professionals to help you design those plans, or whether you would just use your own personal experience and knowledge to put together that engagement work.
No, we did it ourselves completely, but then I think, you know, all local authorities are different, and we are one, I don't, you know, I can't speak for others, but we've done an awful lot of workshops and engagement for different, you know, reasons. So we felt fairly comfortable with all of that, I think, but it just varied, you know, and I think I absolutely believe that in some instances there's a really strong role in terms of getting that professional advice, but it just depends on what skill set you have in the team. And I think one of the things, you know, within my team is we're not all ecologists, you know, I am, but some of my team are bringing much more sort of project management, strategy development, and they're complete non-ecologists. And actually that was a real benefit, you know, so they're very good at creating strategies and doing engagement, you know, at say a corporate level, but actually knew nothing about the environment. And I think having the combination of it, you know, environmental expertise and someone who's able to do sort of things that are more strategic cross-sectoral work was a real advantage.
Lovely, thank you. Can I just quickly ask Sarah, so Philippa, in terms of your project team, you didn't recruit anyone, you used your in-house, and if you did, what happened to their day jobs? Because that's our issue we've got at the moment, is everyone's already working at capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's just the way the stars align. A new team member joined who basically came with a clean slate because they were brand new and weren't bringing lots of baggage with them. So that it was partly just timing, but in other instances, yes, you would almost inevitably, I would say, need to kind of have someone. I mean, because the person who joined was doing this 100% of the time for the period. You know, it was a significant, but it was just a matter of timing that he happened to be new.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Liz, Philippa. Right, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to stop it there, I think, and just wrap up. So it obviously has been a whistle-stop tour of all of the pilots, but massive thank you to everybody. It was really useful for me just to get that overview and hear the things that you're saying, which are obviously the most important things for you. And I just scribbled down a few things that I thought came away. So things like data and mapping, obviously really critical. These are things that we all need to share learning on, I think. I think it's really important that we do, and really worried, as David in Northumberland said, that we could be using data to produce lots of lovely shiny maps to show that we've done something, but they don't actually mean much. So it's all got to be user friendly at the end of the day, Pip, as you were saying. And engagement, stakeholder engagement, obviously really key to this. So sharing any learning and toolkits, and you know, we don't all have staff who are only good at it. So anything we can learn from each other on that, and not raising expectations. Prioritization as well. That was all quite funny hearing from you saying you had all these thousands of pages of suggestions and had to whittle it down to like 10 priorities, and you know, and what that really means. That's going to be quite interesting in terms of the DEFRA guidance for priorities for who, and we all have so many different people with different priorities and different funding streams and so I'm quite intrigued by all of that, and all the different skill sets that you need to bring to this as well, obviously, is really important. So thank you. And I think so Liz, Krista and others, it would be really good to have a discussion separately about how, you know, Natural England, we are going to all share stuff very similarly to PAS and Biodiversity Net Gain Basecamp, which seems to be working really well, and loads of stuff being shared around that, and lots of deep dive workshops, horrible phrase, but all of that stuff. So, and I think I haven't been able to keep track of the chat, but Christy, you've been suggesting things. So yeah, so that's it, it's 4 o'clock. Oh, has anyone got anything else they want to share? Really quickly, Natural England, anything you want to say? I'm not sure who's here now. I know that a few people.
Yeah, I'm still here. It's Matt.
Hi, Matt.
The one thing I would say is remember that these are iterative. You do not have to get them perfectly. You need to approach them with ambition, but you don't have to get it. You won't be able to get it totally right the first time. These things you will feed off each other. You will feed as the evidence base grows. There's all sorts of things that are going to feed into these, so that they will get better and better as we produce further iterations. So don't beat yourselves up.
Don't panic.
And sometimes some of those questions, the answer is, what do you think? You do it. Have a go, because you might come up with a better idea than anybody else has come up with, and that's where that learning will start to occur.
Yeah, but we also don't want to reinvent the wheel. So anything that we can share and learn, it's also useful, isn't it? But
absolutely, yeah. Thanks,
Matt. Some wise words to finish on. Don't panic. You won't get it right. And from Pip, just get on with it. All right. Thank you very, very much, everybody. That was really useful. And let's just carry on this discussion. I think we need some sort of platform, at least a therapy session as well for all of us as we start to go through this together. So that's it. Thank you. We'll share stuff and be in touch. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Sarah, it's Liz here.